Welcome, everyone. Here we are inching our way towards the end of September, and we welcome you back for the 19th broadcast of Awaken Your Inner Genius. And so here we are tonight. We have our esteemed panel. We have Karen Elkins, who is working behind the scenes, helping us get ready for our visual journey later. And we are tonight here at lesson 16. But before we begin, why don't we just settle down, take 60 seconds to tune into the ocean sounds and just calibrate as we decentrate for just a moment, and enjoy the ocean sounds that John has brought through for us. If you'll close your eyes for just a moment, and if you'll breathe in, and as you breathe out, slowly get centered in gratitude for this universal heartbeat. You'll breathe in again. And as you breathe out, let go of all the things that are on your mind today. Listen to that ocean, remembering that a wave knows not where it stops and where it begins, for we are all a part of the ocean. If you'll breathe in deeply one more time, and breathe out, and become just centered where you are, inviting in this gift that you have given yourself tonight by joining us here for the Awaken Your Inner Genius. And when you are ready, open your eyes and just enjoy that sunset that's in that ocean. Wow. All right, welcome everyone. So I am broadcasting today from my new studio at the actual Russell Museum. So I'm excited about that. We'll see how that all works out tonight. If we would just bring up the slides right quick, and we want to remind everybody of where we are for right now. And so here at the beginning, if we'll go back to the very first one there, James, we're going back to the we are here at lesson 16, September 22nd. For some reason, lesson 16 is where it is. I'm not sure why it kicked back like that. So that is where we are today. Next Sunday, we will not have a broadcast. It'll be the first time that we've taken off in all this time, but we are going to have the Visual Journeys playlist. So if we would just advance on to the next one. Want to remind everybody why we do this. We've been saying this for the past few times, and we want to remind everybody why we do this. Please remember, hello, it's so good to see you all, Linda and Dee and Susan and many, many others. If we'll continue to the next one, James, we do this because we want to focus on this. I'm not sure why this all got messed up tonight. I don't know why we're having some technical difficulties. If we'll skip on there. But what we focus on is the man who tapped the secrets of the universe, and we focus on the home study course. And so remember, if you can read and count to 9, you too can master the secrets of the universe. And so we focus here on the home study course. And so why don't we go ahead and begin, James, for some reason, if you'll just check. I'm not sure why we're having a technical difficulty with the text, but that's the way things roll. So Bonnie, welcome to you as well. So to our panel here today, I wanted to start off, Margaret, if you would, before we dive into lesson number 16, why was answering the questions that students sent to Walter and Leah Russell so important to them?
Yeah, Leah Russell, she said every time she spoke to a group of people, she knew everybody was at a different stage of unfolding. And so by including these questions from people, it helps everybody else that has that same question, or everybody else that's at that stage of unfolding. And so it's a way of being a little bit more personal with the student body.
Thank you. And Margaret, what would you say if a new student has jumped in, they just found out about our Awaken Your Inner Genius channel, and they just found out about us? What would you say? Here they are. They know we're finishing up Unit 4, and let's just say that they're starting on Unit 1. What would you say to them? And I'm going to ask Jim and John the same thing.
Well, actually, I would tell them, jump right in and join us with the units that we're currently on. Only because there's always something that is going to be revealed. So if they don't have personal time to get caught up in the reading, they should go ahead and read the units that are going to be discussed on that following Sunday and really join in on the discussion. And then as they can, they could go back through the YouTube channel and then catch up at a later time. It's too hard to cram it in because there's so much in every
Right.
unit.
Right. There is so much in every unit. And so, Jim, what would you say to someone who thinks and might be concerned that they're behind?
I agree with Margaret. Try and go along with us and then try and catch up on your studying. You can be studying Unit 19 or 16, I'm sorry, and at the same time reading 1 through 16 to catch up. Because the premise is pretty much the same. What they're doing in my world, what they're doing in every unit is they're trying to help you understand that there is no separation between you and divinity that you individually and collectively do not make. That's a big jump for humanity.
All right, I love that. And so, John, I'll ask you to comment, and then Ken, before we continue into the actual lesson. What would you say to someone who is a little bit late to joining us, but is interested in continuing the journey? How do you encourage them and give them confidence that they're exactly where they need to be?
How I would encourage them is that if they don't have a home study course in front of them, they need to get one, because otherwise they'll never catch up. But if you have a home study course in front of you, my comrades have said it beautifully. You know, you can catch up at any time. You can be with us on 16, and, you know, throughout the rest of the week, you can read and catch up. So it doesn't matter. And I love that point Margaret made earlier about what Leo said. You know, everybody is at a different level of understanding and unfolding, right? There's no right, there's no wrong. And that's what we're here for, is to guide these folks the best that we can. And hopefully we can answer some questions for them along the way.
All right, that sounds good. Ken, are you with us tonight?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. And what would you say to someone who is just joining us here, jumping in?
Catch up. Where the hell you been? No, I was kidding. One I would say is there's no finish line. You know, so you begin where you're at. You're right where you're supposed to be. That's the principle of this whole philosophy. We are all right where we're supposed to be. So you're not behind. You're right where you're supposed to be. So dig in, and there's plenty of footage and prior episodes you can go back to. But I like what John Bonsall just said. If you have a home study course, it's really easy, because the idea is that you're going to be studying through the week as we do these lessons anyway, because we're overviewing these lessons. As Margaret said, there's just too much information to try and unpack all in one hour.
All right, so you heard it here then. Let's go ahead and dive into lesson number 16. And I wanted to start off with, John, if you would, read that first sentence or two, and let us start there, because this is we're in lesson 16, so that is not the correct one. We'll call back and do that. But if you have your home study course there, this is lesson number 16, where it's the answer to questions. So if you could start with that first sentence, John.
Okay. More and more questions regarding inner thinking, cosmic consciousness, meditation, and prayer come from advanced students who find it difficult to fully comprehend them, even though they have studied a whole year. So many write that they think they have grasped it, but nothing happens, and they wonder why. We will give you a few of these, for the answers may help you if you're in the same state of half comprehension.
All right, so I thought that was interesting, because they say nothing happens. What would that even mean, John? So someone who is studying this and says nothing happens, what do you think they were alluding to?
Well, they're expecting immediate results. It don't work that way. You know, we're in a 3D world, and it takes time to do things. You know, it takes time to decentrate, to get to that 0 point. And once you're there, then what do you do?
Right.
You know, you gotta clear your mind. You know, you gotta sit there and be quiet and listen to that inner voice. And it's talking to people 24/7, but most people don't listen to it. They don't pay attention to it. And that's why they don't get any results, because they're, you know, I think they're trying to accelerate the process and they don't really yet know what they're doing or how to do it properly.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and dive in. So, Jim, if you would, I thought that first question really spoke to you because you talk a lot about this issue of prayer. So if you could just read the question there, because this was an actual letter that Walter Leo received. And it talks about, you have said that neither of you prays with words. I found this particular question very interesting.
Sure. You have said that neither of you pray with words. Why is that? All of my life, I have heard clergymen pray frequently to God in church and heard my parents thank God for each meal. It is a beautiful and inspiring custom. I know you have a good reason, but it seems to me the custom of praying at times, such as upon retiring or at a meal or at meal times, is very beautiful. Also, when one is faced with a problem, one should pray to God for a solution and also pray when one desires something. Does it not say in the Bible, ask and ye shall receive? This question is not asked in a critical sense, for we revere you and your teachings. It is asked simply because we have never before heard such a custom as yours. I have heard also that you do not believe in the idea of kneeling in prayer or bowing your heads in humility. Is that true? And if so, will you explain why?
All right. So to everyone who's with us here today, I see Karen and Linda and Dee and Deborah, and I know we have a number of others that are tuning in here on TikTok as well. So this answer that the Russells give us is very intriguing. So I'm going to split this up between between three of our seasoned students tonight. And so Margaret, I'm going to bring up a few things in this first paragraph, and I'm going to ask you to reply first because they said this: we're glad you asked the question, for we think that people would become very much closer to God if they pray our way than with words or at periodic times like taking meals or medicines. The answer lies in an attitude of the mind. We feel God's presence at all times, not periodically. The difference between our way and the way of mass man is basically founded upon the fact that we are both illuminates. Illuminates are those who have become aware of God's presence within them. Having become one with God, we cannot possibly set periodic times when we shall be aware of his presence any more than we could not set times for breathing in periodic intervals. So could you reply to that? Because that's a really different perspective before we go on to the next paragraph.
Yeah, you know, Leo always said that when people pray, they're usually praying to something outside of themselves. And they knew that they were one with stillness, with God's knowing. They were totally one. So you wouldn't talk out loud in words to something outside of yourself when it's already within you. So they spoke silently and wordlessly. So if they did face a problem, they would essentially go quiet, seeking a resolution to a situation. Mm-hmm. So, but never in words out loud. Leo had a special settee in her bedroom, and every afternoon about 3:00, she would lay quietly on that, and she would decentrate. So it was her way of recharging herself so that she could continue her work after that recharge.
Well, I thought the next paragraph was especially telling. So, John, if you'll continue reading that next paragraph, then I'm going to have Ken do the last one. Speaking of all of our lives.
All of our lives since the event took place which caused that unity, which gave us full knowledge of our divinity, it was as impossible to pray in words and sounds at periodic times as it would be to talk out loud to ourselves at times. One, our whole lives are a continuous prayer, every moment of them, whether working at our easels, writing books, creating beauty in the arts, or teaching others how to find the way to God. There is not one waking moment when we forget God to attend to our physical affairs for a while, then recall him when we have a problem or when we want him to grant us some favor, which we never do. So, Kimberly, what I would add to what Margaret said and what the Russells just wrote here, and Leo, you've heard us say this before, but Leo said it best. There is no position, technique, or ritual to God. God is, and that's what they just said there. God is, and there is never a moment, waking or not awake, that they are not aware of their oneness with their Creator. So that pretty much wraps that up.
Well, and I want to add to that, but first I want to pull Deborah's comment up. So Deborah says this: there is a fine line between giving an issue up and surrendering to a higher power and giving our power away to a higher power. Well said, Deborah. Certainly appreciate that. I know for me, back in 2012, when I did recognize that I and my Father were one, and I realized that my life was a prayer. And living in the South, then I had so many people that wanted me to define, what belief system I was, what is it that I believed, and how was it, what was my prayer like, and I really did understand this point that the Russells made, was that everything was a prayer. Could you imagine if we all walked through the world with that understanding, that everything that we do is a prayer, every thought we send, everything that we bring up? I thought that was incredibly powerful. And so, Ken, I wanted to know if you would go to that next paragraph, because I thought especially that last line, you can read whatever you'd like through that paragraph, because I thought it was powerful enough for us to slow down here this evening. If we'll go back to that. And it starts with, we do have special occasions.
Kimberly, can I interrupt just one moment?
Please.
If I may. Ken, pardon me just for a moment, please. The comment that Deborah made there at the end, she said about giving my power or our power over to a greater thing, that tells me that she's not aware of her God self yet. You're not turning your power over to anything greater. God bestowed upon you all that God is. You already have it within you. So you're not turning anything over to a higher power. You are that higher power. And you've got to accept
how I interpreted it. Yes. That's how I interpreted it.
Anyway, I apologize, Ken.
No, I actually would like to make a little comment on that myself. Is that, to me, I think we're talking about the difference between our sense self and our true self. Our true self is that when you go look in the mirror, point to where you are at in that body. And I doubt you're going to find any spot you can point to on your body where you say you are at. So that is your divine self. Our sense self is our physical form, which, as barbaric man and as many people live, do nothing but try and satisfy the body through the sex, security, and social instincts. So for me, it was a building process to learn to be what we use a term called mindfulness, and that's being mindful of staying connected to that source, which I am, as John's saying. To realize that it is I am is trust that that's what we're telling you, that's what it is, because people have lived it before us and we live it. So just know that the I am is you. Getting in touch with that I am and staying connected to that I am, for me, it was a building process, and it still is. It still is. That's why for me, I read in the morning, and I do have my quiet time and decentrate, and that sets my tempo for the day to stay connected. It's not an in out. It is a continual connection. It's kind of like thinking about nature turning on and off. It's never off, but nature's always on, right? So is God, and so is that light of God within us. But to me, though, it was about building a relationship. I realized I had a relationship with my sense self, and that I had to learn to have a relationship with my true self, which is that oneness with that light of God centering me.
Well, so let me add something to that. I remember having to break out of some of the belief systems before seeking something outside of ourselves. And I remember it was a very important step in between that understanding and the understanding that the divinity was inside, was to recognize higher power in its totality of an individual and myself, as well as all of creation. So I recognized what Deborah said as someone who is on that continuum of learning that step. So I appreciate you bringing that up, John. And I also remember what it's like to have had my world in that place where we always looked externally. You know, I look at admiration to Jim and Margaret and John and Ken, who have not been trapped per se in some of the dogma that so many of millions and millions and billions of people are. It takes a while to step out. And part of what I really appreciated, what they talked about, was that there were no words really needed. That was part of the difference, that when your life becomes a prayer, there are no words that are needed, because everything that comes from you is an expression of that divinity. Does that resonate?
Yes.
All right. So, Ken, if you would, if you would go to that paragraph right quick, because I thought it was very interesting about what they talked about thought language. So if you'll pull a few things from that and definitely end with that highlighted last sentence.
Sure. We do have special occasions of reminding ourselves of our unity when we are at dinner with friends, for example. We then hold hands around the table and talk through each other in God's silent thought language, merely for the purpose of making a beautiful little ceremony which recognizes our unity as a group. If we have friends, ourselves, ourselves, if we are alone. If on such an occasion, that must be a grammatical error. If on such an occasion one feels like bowing his head in reverence or humility, one does so. But on the other hand, one who feels the exaltation and ecstasy of the glory which the light is, and that's a capital I is, may lift his head high in the spirit of what the prophet said. I will lift up my eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my strength. I really like. There's a part in there where in the home study course where prayer is talked about, and that the strongest prayer is to not have one person at the table sit there and lead a prayer, but for everybody to be quiet. Like so I see them holding hands, and then you would have that moment to do whatever appreciation for the friendship or the gathering. But it would be internal and it would be wordless within yourself, that it didn't necessarily need someone saying, God be with us at the dinner table. Thank you for these friends and all these blessings and this food and this white tablecloth and these 4 chairs and the house and the roof surrounding us and the gate and all, you know what I mean? You could go through all that rhetoric, but somebody cannot pray for you. We all have to have that internal prayer always actively going on is the ideal. But again, I always like to talk about being a building process. It is not a light switch. You may awaken that way, but as you're going to read, you don't want the full whammy right away. So it's about learning, and that's what these lessons are about, and why the first 2 units are all dedicated to the scientific explanation of what prayer is, what prayer means, and how to transform from the old way of praying to
Sure.
a more personal way.
All right, so let's pull up the comment from Dee on the screen here, and she says this. She says, and the importance of I am statements, and I am statement is the action of God, the divine within. There's a lot of wisdom with that, Deb. I'm always talking to Ken about that. How many of us casually say, I am exhausted, I am something, and every time we're actually speaking it into existence, right, Jim?
Yes. And it's that absolute.
Well, and we underestimate the power of those words, and they talk about this here. But I want to go to what you're talking about as far as if you'll scroll down to the bottom there, page 297, because they go on to talk about that there's another reason. There's another reason bigger than that, which makes it impossible for us to pray aloud in words. This spoke so much to my heart, and I'm curious about some of the rest of you if it speaks to you. It says, it is this: the very act of talking aloud in words implies that one is talking to another person outside of himself. As you talk to your father or mother, we feel that God is within us. And as we scroll to the next page, that we are one with him, that our mind is his mind. And they talk about that mother, father, God. We therefore think with him instead of talking to him. He is here within us, not over there afar from us. His dwelling place in heaven is our dwelling place in heaven. He has nobody to hear with, so why talk aloud in words? So I'm curious what the panel thinks about that. Margaret, you want to comment? And then let me ask who would like to go after Margaret.
Yes, I love that statement. He has no body to hear with, so why talk aloud in words? And there was a science panel a few days back, the museum sponsored, and Darren Kalum, our former science officer, did a part on We Define God. And he's saying because God is still, that's the reason why it's not visual. But God is all knowledge. Now, most people, when they think of knowledge, they think of books and learning. But when the Russells reference knowledge, it's that stillness knowing. In other words, if you have a flash of inspiration, it comes from seemingly out of the blue. It's really coming from the stillness. So when you think of inspiration coming to you all of a sudden, it came from that stillness, which is God. So, so knowledge, in other words, it's always there, and it's there to be tapped, but you have to tap it by meeting God where he is, which is the stillness. That's why the Bible says, be still and know. You have to meet God. Yeah.
So, John, can you add to that? Because one of the first things you had ever taught to me was this issue about this out of the blue. I mean, this is a phrase that we've all used in our vernacular as a human. Continue with that conversation about out of the blue.
Well, I would like to, but that blue top you have on is blinding me, and I'm lost for words.
There you go, out of the blue.
You might be colorblind because it looks purple to me, pal.
Wow.
It is royal blue.
Yeah. No, out of the blue is a statement that is associated with the Creator, with mind. And that's and for people have got to understand that God is. That's it. So everything that is, was, or will be is from God. And the quicker that one can accept their own divinity and absorb that understanding, then their growth will accelerate. And then they'll sit back one day and go, oh my God, how did I not catch that earlier? It's like a sunrise or a sunset. It talks to you in the silence. You don't need somebody to tell you, oh, look at that sun come up over the mountain, right? That's God talking to you. Just listen.
Okay. All right. So let me pull up some comments here before we end up taking our first break. So Susan has a comment that we'll pull up here on the screen, and then I'm going to go to 7P. So Susan says, I talk to myself all the time, and I'm really having a conversation with God as we together live one day at a time. All right. Certainly.
Beautiful.
Beautifully said. And then 7P, I believe, let's pull that one up. Not to change the topic or push a different book or anything, but the answer's in the title, One Rule, One Law, I Create by Aaron Worley. Thank you. You know, that was one of the things that I really appreciated about the Russells is that all the way through the home study course, Jim, they actually mention a number of other books and support of other people's works.
Yes, most of the books that they mentioned were actually part of the curriculum originally at the USP. There are a lot of them out of print right now. I'd love to see the day come when they returned. Let me touch real quickly on this oneness with God. I've mentioned before, and I won't get into a lot of detail, but I drowned when I was 5. My experience from the time I was born into body was an absolute knowing that I was accompanied by a presence that loved me, period. My family, my brothers, they couldn't give what that presence gave. So when I drowned and went out of body, there were no 9 gates that I went through. This 5-year-old went from outside of body directly to divinity. And I was completely enwrapped in the presence of love that is beyond any words. They're all correct. You can't put it in words. But this is what was clear to me. Even though I was omniscient with this divine source, I was everywhere and everything with this divine source. I never stopped being me. It did not absorb me. It knew me, and I knew the presence. And it was universal and it was total. And then when I look back at body, and it's kind of hard when you're in that divine state and you're still attached to body, you have body sensations that they're not strong, but they're there. So what I saw, and I've told people this in the past, I saw a sun glistening on the water over this body through the eyes of this body. I saw a connecting cord. I was 5. I don't remember whether it was gold or not. I just saw this cord between us, and I knew my universality through this loving being. But this loving being sought nothing from me. It didn't seek to absorb me or take from me or ask nothing of me. It just was universal love.
Okay, very powerful. There's so much to be said here, and there's a lot more to go over here in questions in the Q&A here. So I'm going to ask the panel. I mentioned earlier, right now you've got almost 200 years of experience of the Russell teachings, between John Bonsall being the former president of the University of Science and Philosophy, 50 years teaching it, Margaret Rue, and John also living with Leo, Margaret living with the Leo Russell for 10 years, also studied for 50 years, Jim, 50 years, Jim's wife, Jackie Porter, 45 years, Ken, 30 years, and then between Karen Elkins and I, we have a pretty robust team here. So as they get ready to come in back from the break, I will continue our conversation. If you would, to the panel, please be sure to look at the comments. For right now, it is time for our 3-minute break, and I just wanted to come over here and share with everyone that this was our Awaken Your Inner Genius banner that we actually used at Tesla Tech. We thought you'd enjoy celebrating that as we continue this conversation. But it is time for our first break. So let's take 3 minutes, get some oxygen, stand up, stretch, get some water, and let's continue with this very powerful discussion. See you in 3. All right. So as we find our way back, hard to believe sometimes how fast 3 minutes goes by. I wanted to pull up just a couple of comments though. So 7P, your last comment made me chuckle. He says, I met that banner, ha ha ha. So we actually must have met you at Tesla Tech. So we're glad to have you back with us. That's always good news. I wanted to go back to what Karen said. Karen Maheen, if you would pull up that particular quote. Says, so interesting. I was talking out loud with God today, asking for help with the current situation, and I just received it. Love that. And D, I figured the panel was going to have something to say to you about D, your comment, and I thought it was beautiful, but I know the panel is going to have some comments. When I'm writing and divine inspired words come to me, sometimes I cry because I know it is not me. So what would the panel say to that? I know where D was coming from, but I think there might be some additions there. What do you think?
Well, go ahead, Margaret.
Well, I think she's giving credit to God, to the inspiration coming through. Yes. So it's not of her body, but it is of her and God's inspiration.
It would be nice for her to be able to receive that inspiration in a loving way and try not to get too emotional about it, try to stay in the moment.
Well, I think many times I am moved to tears just by the sheer magnitude of understanding the larger beauty of creation. So I find that often the heart becomes so full of love that it almost feels like your heart's going to burst at times. So I appreciated that.
We are emotional beings, and we're evolving through. It's not that we don't have emotions; it's that we're learning how to handle them correctly. So that separation is real. I wouldn't want to be at one with John's mind and head, nor any more than he'd want to be at one with me. It's nice to have the separation between the two. I don't think I'm at one with divinity. I do know that divinity is at one with me. And I know that the time will come when I will know myself as absolutely one with divinity, but I'm not there yet.
All right, so let's continue, if we would, over here on page 299. I'd like to go down to the second paragraph here and ask the team to mention this, because this has come up in a couple of our lessons at this point. It said, what would you say to the farmer who asked for a crop in spoken words and then waited for God to give him what he asked? You would undoubtedly think he was insane if you really believed that God answered prayers that way. We call that wishful thinking. Yet countless numbers of people really believe that if they ask fervently enough, God will do for them what they ask without cooperation by them. What would you say of the man that asks for money or love or success or any of the many desires of man without doing anything about it himself? What would you think of the man who asked God to cure his stomach trouble and then kept eating the things which caused it? We know what your answer would be, and yet millions of people pray fervently to ask God to stop the wars which man has made. So I want to ask the group to please mention this, because this is something I find profound about the Russell work, is this whole idea of self-responsibility. So could we hear from each one of the panel? I'd like to start off with Jim and then go to Margaret and then Ken and John. Jim?
Yeah, that's those it isn't broken moments we have in life. When we look out at humanity or even within ourselves and we see things that we do not approve of in ourselves and others, and we think somehow that it's broken. And then the next worst thing you can do is think that you have some responsibility to fix it. The only person you're responsible to on this planet or any other planet is yourself and your own well-being. Now, you are responsible to be loving to others, but you're not responsible to make them loving to you, and you're not responsible to change their lives or fix them. So in essence, what we always want to remind ourselves of is the planet we live on isn't broken, it's evolving. And at this time, some of us are awake more than others, and the lack of the slowness of that evolution in other people can be frustrating. But there's people above us that are more awakened. Now, John and Margaret, I can tell you that when living with an Illuminate, with all the beauty and love that they were, there's times that you could clearly see this being was frustrated with how slow we were to understand things.
Okay.
And so Yeah, I don't know any other way
Have
to say it.
patience is what you're saying, Jim. All right. So, Margaret, if you would hone in on the issue of self-responsibility. So, if someone's coming to the work, they're listening to this on Sunday nights. The Russells were very much what I found this particular paragraph about was saying that we have a role in all of this. We can't just pray for wishful thinking, that we have an active role in that self-responsibility. What would you say to someone who's learning that? It sounds, but it's not really.
You know, I think it's very freeing because so many people are caught up thinking that they have to pray for God and hope that it comes, right? So they're stressed, and they could release that stress immediately if they took action themselves toward a project or toward the solution. Once you take that action, it releases the tension because you know you're on your way. But a lot of people, because of the fear in the world, they freeze and they do nothing but worry, which is a useless, a very, unproductive reaction. So when you know that you're responsible for doing your half and then God will re-give his half, you have to initiate it first. But that's through action, not wishful thinking.
Okay. So who did I say I was going to next? John?
No, you said you're going to Ken Pearson.
All right, Ken,
Eliminate.
what's your thought? And I want to pull up Susan's comment because Susan brings up exactly the title of Leo's book, God Will Work With You, but Not For You.
That was going to be my comment, part of it. And that's, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's talking about you must live the prayer, not just make the prayer. There's two parts to prayer is the way I look at it. There's the petition and then there's the performance. So once we make that petition, just like Margaret said, now you need to perform. And right action is the key to good living. If you don't take a right action, you're not going to feel better. Let's say you're not in a great space and you're asking God to be with you and to help you get into a better space. You might think of, like Margaret said, well, what can I do to feel good about something? Clean my room, wash my car, something I can take activity in that makes me feel like I'm being productive, because maybe it's just a lack of productivity I'm feeling. So do something productive. But again, two parts to prayer. There's the petition and then the performance. And a lot of us just make petitions expecting God to do the performance, which is again, like it's talking about in the farmer and planting the seed and not planting the seed versus, planting the seed.
All right. I have a comment after John.
I remember listening in to a conversation Leo was having with a guest at Swananoa. It was on a weekend when, a bunch of people would come in. And so this person asked Leo, what is life? And Leo looked at her and said, life is work. Okay. Nobody's going to hand you anything. You got to get off your keister and you got to do something. Okay. Work is love made visible. All right. So nobody's going to hand you anything. So if you just meet God halfway, you can have anything and everything that you want. Okay.
All right. So, John, I think that certainly is well said. JP 7P was asking what page we're on. We're on page 299. And so I want to continue with this because having lived in that area where I watched a lot of people pray for things to happen and not take action. So there was a methodology that I was taught in all of my early years about the fact that you would pray for it, and if it wasn't given to you, then it wasn't meant to be. There was a larger picture, which perhaps might be, but I saw a lot of people, which was very confusing to my young mind. I see a lot of people who would say, oh, God just hasn't given me good health. And yet I would see them eating chocolate cake and drinking sodas and then blaming God for their inability to discipline their bodies. And so as someone who lost 100 pounds 18 years ago, I really began to understand, that we had a role as well. And so I don't mean to be so simple about it, but this is something that is seeped, I think, into humanity, and why humanity is stuck on a victimhood mentality when we're the ones who are actively creating much of our own troubles. Does that resonate with anybody?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Okay, so I want to continue here as we talk about this, because I want to go back down to the bottom of page 299 as we're going through, and Leo and Walter included a funny story. If we'll go back to the brackets here, it talks about, I cannot take away that privilege without taking away your free will and making an automaton of you. I hold the right to the reaction of men, for I must balance all things in my universe. That's what they said God was saying. But the reaction will be as hurtful to you as your action. That is the law of love, which gives and regives in kind and equally. And so they were talking about how joyful it was to answer this. But if you'll scroll down to the top of page 300, there was a funny little story there, John. If you would read that sentence about a North Carolina preacher once called them rocking chair prayers.
Most of all prayers for such requests are but wishful thinking. A North Carolina colored preacher once called them rocking chair prayers. He said that rocking chair prayers could be answered if you got off the porch and helped God answer your prayer.
I thought that was pretty funny, actually. So I thought that was funny. All right, so let's scroll down to the next question here. It said, I'd like to know more about the meaning of the phrase, which we so often hear, be still and know. Be still and know. So, Margaret, if you would, read those first few sentences talking about the answer there.
Answer. The universe of all knowledge is the invisible universe of stillness from which motion springs. The entire chapters of 2 units of this course are devoted to explaining this universe of mind where God dwells. We call it space in common terms. We call it the universal vacuum in our terms. You will see it fully diagrammed in the drawings of rings with holes in them, which we tell you how matter is created. That is where knowledge comes from. That is where power comes from. That is where inspiration and thought come from. That center is like the fulcrum from which a moving lever extends.
All right. So if we could comment about this, because they go on to talk about that is what the universe of mind and matter is like. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of the fulcrum. And I know it sounds a little bit repetitive, but this is really important for us to get, because the bigger lessons that we're getting ready to go into continue to build on this even more. So Margaret, if you'll comment, and then I'll ask John, Jim, and Ken.
Yes, I think it is a difficult concept to grasp, because the fulcrum is still and it's invisible, and yet all power is there. And so, in other words, when you have motion cannot be balanced unless there is a fulcrum. And so I think after a while it becomes more and more intuitive. But you can't have, like, for instance, a whirlwind and a water drain, right? There's a still fulcrum down the very center. But you can't even have a whirlpool action unless you have that fulcrum, that still center.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Let's keep continuing. John?
Well, let me just expand on what Margaret just said. So remember, a term that is synonymous with God is gravity. So all of us have seen those photos of a hurricane developing, or a hurricane that's established, and then you hear them reference the eye of the hurricane. Well, from the eye of the hurricane is where all power of that hurricane emanates, in that stillness. So when the eye of a hurricane passes over an island, for example, then everything just goes still. There's absolute quietness and stillness for a moment while that eye passes over. But within that eye is the fulcrum, is gravity, is God. And everything extends from it into it.
Okay, let's keep going. Who wants to add to that?
Well, keeping in mind that gravity share we're talking about as stillness is just that. Now we see when we measure gravity as we believe it to be, we're measuring the outward pull of force toward the walls of the spinning cyclonic tool, thought, action, whatever it is. But so we measure gravity as having weight based on that pull, how far down in the funnel we are, and the pull grows greater and greater and greater. But gravity itself is stillness and eternal. And that still eternal fulcrum allows that illusion of duality to take place. But it does not get caught up in that duality. The duality never conquers gravity. It simply returns to the stillness, which that gravity center is.
Okay, so I appreciate the high level conversations for all three of you, and I'm going to ask Ken if he will. I'm going to share what happened with us the other day, and I'm going to ask him to comment, because as a student of only 3 years, understanding that the fulcrum was that which centers all things. And if I looked at this as in life, this has been really important for me in the Russell teachings. Is I even had a moment the other day where life was just going back and forth. I mean, it was out of control. Every time I turned around, there was one thing going wrong and another thing going wrong. Anybody who's listening right now, please comment if you can relate to that. And so even when you understand this work, there are times that your life can just, I mean, it's just going nuts. And you can begin to really feel like a victim. You can begin to feel out of control. You can begin to lose your groundedness during that moment. And at that moment, I asked if Ken would just hold me for 5 minutes so that I could find my way back to that centeredness. And so that was, I know we all have the ability to do that anytime, but he commented and saw what happened just in that 5 minutes. And so Ken, can you make what we were just talking about very practical and just what we experienced with that the other day? Hello?
For me, yeah, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think a simpler version, as opposed to gravity shafts and things like that, is laid out by Dr. Russell in imagining a plank, a long piece of wood, and you want to use it as a leverage to pick something up. Well, you would need a rock or a boulder or something in order for that plank to be able to work. If it was just laying flat on the ground, it wouldn't work as a leverage. But if you had a rock and you put a big plank on top of that rock, you could, in principle, lift the world. You could lift the earth if the plank was long enough. So that's the simplest term to realize. Without the rock, which is the fulcrum, the plank means nothing. You couldn't lift anything. If you've ever pried something with a hammer or a bar, imagine a long plank, you could pick up anything. Also, to me, in terms of the stillness and what that represents, is that it's that undivided half. It's that, love is stillness, because you can't see it, but you can know it, right? Those things that we know, we cannot see. Those things that we see, we cannot know. And I guess maybe a better example of that, of why space is so pervasive, if you think about it, as it's talked about and will be taught in the course, is if you took all the space that separates the cells of your body out of your body, all the space that separates the cells, you need a microscope to see yourself. That's how much space there is. So, as God says, I am within all things, outside of all things. So that means that there's a centering stillness to everything. And it's in the stillness, sort of like like John said about that beautiful sunset. If you go look at a beautiful sunset, there's no one point that you would point to in that sunset and say, that's what the beauty is. You just see the beauty, the beauty, and the stillness is the same thing to me. I just know when I'm being still. So one of the things I also want to say, and I'll wrap up on this, is, there's a difference between thinking, the brain, and the mind. You can weigh the brain, but you cannot weigh the mind. And in principle, you're going to learn in these lessons, there's only one mind, and that is the mind of God centering each and every one of us. We get confused between matter and space, just like you get confused between brain and mind.
Well, and so where I was hoping he was going to go with that conversation, it went a little farther out than I'd hoped. What I was trying to say is that at any moment, for any of us that are actually feeling like life is out of control, how do we come back to the fulcrum? And so I want to ask everybody in the comments, if you would, what do you do? Margaret, what do you do? I mean, for some of us, it might be going to burn a candle to help make us, centered. For some of us, it might be going outside to breathe oxygen. For some, it might be asking someone who's close to you, can you breathe with me for just a moment? But what do you do to be able to come back to that point? Because that's what I found that particular paragraph is finding that still point. So as we're going through that, I'm going to ask everybody in the participants to please put that in the chat box. So if we would, I do want to go through one more question.
Can I just say one more thing on that? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I hate to interrupt you, my dear. But now I will add to that moment in which you're talking about. We had a male-female equal exchange, and we grounded each other. We actually found the fulcrum by my beloved being a female and me being a male. And not only that, we are balanced mates and I don't really care about anybody else's opinion. And so in that 5 minutes, it was really beautiful and powerful because I realized it did quiet her down. It did quiet me down. We both got collectively quiet by finding that equator between male and female, right? What separates yin from yang is that stillness, is that fulcrum.
Well, and I would encourage anyone as you're finding a way to stillness, and finding that fulcrum again, I think is incredibly, incredibly powerful. But we have just a quick question here on the top of page, on the about bottom page of 301. And it says, I lent my book, The God Will Work With You, but Not For You, to a friend. After 3 weeks, it only read a few pages. While I sat up reading it most of the night with intense interest from the moment I received it. Will you tell me why a university man of supposed cultural standing cannot see in your books what I, who am not even a high school graduate, am inspired by? And so, John, if you would mention the first few sentences in that answer, because I thought that spoke a lot for what they said about this.
I would like to backtrack just a moment on Ken's statement.
Okay.
I don't know who he's trying to kid, but no man has ever won an argument with a woman. I can tell you that.
Yeah, you know that.
There you go. There you go.
I believe Ken or Kimberly yourself would be best to comment on that, because Ken was sharing with me the party you all went to, and I think you experienced the same thing that this lady is asking.
Which comment are you talking about, John? Oh, you mean, right here, the question I just read.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, that where we recently were at a dinner party, same thing, is that sometimes when people are incredibly educated, that they sometimes can't see some of these learnings. And that's what I found their answer here. I'm trying to get us through before the next break. I found their answer incredibly powerful. So if we could just read a few sentences of their answer, because I think this speaks volumes as to what's happened to our society. John?
Am I reading something?
If you could just read the first few sentences, please.
Very good. The conventionally educated man may know the whole encyclopedia, yet be bored by listening to an opera, which would lift you to the high heavens of ecstasy. He might be able to sell $1 million worth of invented products, yet not be able to invent a mousetrap. The human race first unfolds its physical nature. It then unfolds its spiritual or mental nature. The friend to whom who loaned our books has hardly begun to unfold his spiritual nature. He is devoid of feeling of what you feel. His imagination has not yet awakened, which means that his creative powers have not yet awakened. If such a man wrote a book, it would be a rehash from his memories of other books. If he were put on a board of directors of a big company, he would resist change. Would you like me to continue?
So I just want to go on down to the very last line that's highlighted in yellow there, John. I think that's going to be where it kind of wraps up this question, because this, I thought, spoke volumes.
There are millions like him as compared to hundreds like you. The more you offer our books to friends, the sooner you will find that out. Amen to that. Now, instead of you volunteering the book, what I would recommend is that if you could inspire someone with your own words and your own demonstrations, for them to ask if they could borrow your book or read your book. That's the difference.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about this from a university perspective, though. And Jim, if you'll comment, and then I'm going to ask Margaret, because it's been my experience that part of the paradox that we have in society is that the more educated we have become, with universities and remember and repeat, the less connected we become to our spirituality. And having spent a great deal of time on a lot of different campuses, this is almost one of those odd little paradoxes in society that we would think that we would become more advanced. And on one level, we have become advanced, but on a spiritual level, we haven't. And so, Margaret, I was just wondering if you could comment on that before we get ready to take our next break.
Yeah, just from my own personal experience, I was 18 years old and I read the Russell's book, Atomic Suicide, and I was absolutely like so amazed by it. And that's what drew me to work with Leo. And I gave the book to my father, who was an engineer, and he designed steam generators for the nuclear industry. And he said, well, I think this book is kind of silly. And it devastated me. But it's like Leo said, you know, everybody is ready for what they will draw into themselves. In other words, not everybody is ready. And I certainly found that out. There's very few people you can talk this message with, unfortunately. That's why I think it's such a great service what Kimberly is doing by putting this all together, because at
Margaret?
least, you know, you're not living in a vacuum.
I'll bet you Margaret looked up and said, Father, forgive him, for he does not know what he says.
Well, and so
I remember I thought for sure it was going to like really floor him. I thought he was going to say, where did you get this book? You know, because my father had a spiritual side, but he was too conditioned with his education.
Yes.
well, and that's what I wanted to bring up. That's what I was talking about, is that
Yeah.
sometimes our society is actually built to take that out of it. And so while I appreciate the
Right.
kudos, Margaret, it really is a team effort. Ken was the one who had this inspired idea to be able to do this. And we worked together to be able to birth this creation. And then Jim and John and Jackie and Karen Elkins, we all worked so closely together to be able to do this. Ken, you've also had the experience of handing some of these books to people who you thought were spiritual that just said because it was a different kind of spirituality, it didn't land. And you were surprised by that.
Yeah, a Yale, a matter of fact, a Yale educated man that I have a lot of respect for, and intelligent wise, intellect wise, is just a wonderful man. He's a very, very devout Christian, and he's very much into the Bible and its works and trying to, you know, in that path, which, you know, there's no theological way of life in the Bible. That's kind of one of the problems with it, as opposed to this 1-year home study course is purely a theological way of life, guys. What you're getting, to me, when I got this 1-year home study course, there's no finish line. So I was just so excited, and I still so excited. I read it. It's like the first time every time. It's not something you're reading, oh, I know that, and you move on. So, you know, the thing about, you know, these educated people, and I gave it to a friend of mine, he said he thought it was too esoteric. I looked up the word esoteric just so I could understand what he was saying, because it was a Yale word, right? What's esoteric means. And it said hard to understand. So like Shakespeare is esoteric, but you cannot say that Shakespeare is not one of the greatest writers known to man and continues to live on today as one of the greatest writers known to man. So I don't know.
Okay.
I did take it that way. And I think,
well, we've had there's several interesting comments in the chat box. I want to go ahead and jump to Susan. So Susan wants to stand up for all those in higher education here and make sure that we all understand that there are lots of people like her that have several letters after her name, and it doesn't interfere with her spirituality as she has studied and learned about what she's passionate about. So kudos to you, Susan. We see you and we honor that completely. Bonnie had a comment as we continue to have this conversation about the masculine and feminine. She said, this leads me to wonder why I can try to make a point about something and my husband doesn't hear it. But if a man says the same thing, he hears it. And that's a great point. I think we need a whole nother podcast for that one, Bonnie, but we want to make sure that you know that we see you, dear. Ongoing conversation. And last comment before we go to our break here, Karen. So Karen's comment is this: be still and know that I'm God. I live there in my work for hours. And when I walk out, sometimes I flip out as I go out into the world. I'm with you, Karen, especially in traffic. I'm better at it now, but it's been so weird. I appreciate that vulnerability, Karen. I think everyone on this panel can relate to that. So as we have just a few more pages to finish up this lesson. If you have questions, please place them in the chat box. It is time for our next break. So we are going to take 3 minutes and say a gracious thank you to everybody. Enjoy your 3 minutes. It'll be over before you know it. I think somehow the clock started over.
I think you're right, my love.
Yes, so let's bring it on back somehow. We didn't catch that. So I was thinking, are we in a time warp? So sometimes that happens here. So as we come back here, there were just a couple of key points here under the Q&A that I wanted to be sure that we covered. So if I could ask the panel to work with me as we get through these last 5 pages. I'd like us to go here towards the bottom of page 302. And there is a question. Jim, I'm going to ask you to ask the question, when a battery discharges. So when a battery discharges, you just, all right, keep going right there.
When a battery discharges, it is not the same as a body dying. If that is so, is it not a growing body Is not a growing body a charging body? Is not that what we call life and death?
Okay, so if we'll go down to the answer there, Jim, keep reading, because the last thing highlighted in green is going to come back for a question that's a little bit later on.
We can say yes to each of these. Life's simple process of creating matter is an electric charging effect. Everything grows in strength and power by electric charge, just as your battery grows more and more powerful by electric charge. In electric terms, we call it charge. In biological terms, we call it life. It is the same effect as inbreathing. When nature manifests idea, it then rests from the creative action. Discharge then takes the place of charge. Decay replaces growth. Death replaces life. We have just described to you a wave cycle. The universe consists solely of wave cycles which come and go to manifest the idea of eternal life by repetitive sequences of life and death cycles. May I speak briefly on this?
Yes, please.
Make it brief.
I'll do my best, John. I'd like to point out to people that I'm not 20.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, Jim.
I know it's hard to believe, but I'm not. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I was generating life more than I was radiating as death. I was charging more than I was discharging. Now I'm in my 7th decade, in my 73rd year. I know I am discharging faster than I am charging. We call it aging. We call it death. The Russells call it the re-give for that which has been given. I don't struggle with this. I enjoyed my youth. I enjoyed my middle age, and I'm enjoying my elder years. And I will continue to enjoy until I take that last breath. So their point is very clear here. What we tend to want to do is see bodies as self, and they're not. And it's very difficult to let go of that concept. Bodies are temple, I guess I'll use the biblical term. It's a temple in which we reside. And it's a timed element. And each of us has a certain amount of time that we're going to be in body and a certain amount of times that we're going to be out of body. So that's the best I can put it.
Well, I brought it up because I wanted to just come back to this wave pattern, because it's going to come back in our conversation in just a few minutes. And so if we were thinking about this, when they're talking about the wave, that's why it's called "In the Wave Lies the Secret of Creation." So we want to come back to that. So let's continue the conversation here. Please trust me on this one, because I'm trying to get all of our participants and our folks that are viewing. So right now we have over 90 viewers. I want to say thank you to all of our TikTok viewers. Thank you to our YouTube and our Facebook viewers. Please invite your friends to join us here. We're over 400 subscribers on the channel. We have thousands of hours now on watch hours, and this is exciting. So many people want to be able to get this. So hang tight on the wave conversation. I'm trying to manage the time as we're in our last 15 minutes. So when it comes down to the next question, I just want to bring up to the fact that if you have a copy of your home study course, it goes back to there on 303, when again there's another question about meditation. And if you would skip down to where it has the answer, and I want to bring up the things that are highlighted. Okay, so Ken, if you would help me out, because there are some important sentences. If you'll read the items that are highlighted, it was a couple of reminders of what we've talked about before.
Meditation means communion with God. The purpose of meditation is to give you knowledge of the part you are to play in the drama of creation. So in terms of meditation means communion with God, I really love this because we're always in communion. That's why we don't set aside times. And then there's times where I will absolutely focus purely on meditation, which we call decentration, which is to unwind. So it's not a focus. That's actually the wrong word. The word is to unfocus, is to almost daydream, if you will, and just try to be free from the body and forget the body. And so communion with God to me is the difference between talking to my brain and talking to the still mind that centers each and every one of us. Learning that was because I'm a self-talker. I come from a ratty mind. The brain can haunt us. And so I had to learn to stop being a self-talker and learn to be a God talker.
So I want to pause for a moment and ask the panel for their comments about this sentence again, because this sentence is incredibly powerful. The purpose of meditation is to give you knowledge of the part you play in the drama of creation. So I don't want us to blow past this. And if you have your copy of the home study course, I encourage you to put a star there. And because it goes on to talk about how God gives you a little now because you can bear only a little now. When it talks about when you are strong in the light, you'll be given more full chapters. So can each one of you, starting with John and then go to Margaret, can you comment on this drama of creation? How do we live as a human differently if we understand that we are in fact in a play in the drama of creation?
Well, I'll quote Leo again. She said, you could either live a purposeful or a purposeless life. So in the drama of creation, right, you could do either one of those, and the play of creation continues regardless. But the more aware you are of your divine self, the greater the purpose you can give to your being and all that you choose to undertake, instead of just wallowing around.
Okay, Margaret, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. It says here the host. Oh, can you hear me now?
We can.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, earlier, Kim, you said that everything was kind of going wacky and a little out of balance, and you were feeling like everything was not going right. And I was thinking to myself, well, that is the whole drama of creation. And so it's really a lesson for each of us. And I've been through similar circumstances in my career and in life. And every time I face that, I always think to myself, okay, well, what is it that I'm learning from this experience? Because Leo always said, it's not the experience itself that's important. It's what you learn from it. And then you take what you learn and you move forward. And so, but that is the whole drama of creation.
All right. So I'm going to ask Jim if you'll quickly comment before I continue. Kevis, continue.
Yeah, for me, it's listening. I do talk with God. I use words, but I don't always do it silently. But one thing I've learned over the decades is that the answer always returns to me silently and complete. So I think I just drifted off subject, but I apologize. I drifted off subject. But knowing that communion and acting. Oh, I'll jump back on again. So when I find myself in a state of high activity and high demand of my physical self to get things done, I can get overwhelmed. And it's at those moments that I will make myself stop, sit down, and I will commune with Creator. And the answer I always get back, and that I argued with for years, and now at this age I know works, is slow down. Relax. Slow down. It will all get done. And when I hold that state of mind, it does.
Slow down. All right. So that's one additional way that we can be able to do that. So I wanted to continue because this goes back to the wave issue. And Ken, I'll come back to you in just a moment as well. Because when you scroll down here to the bottom of page 303, so we encourage everyone to get a copy of the home study course because there's so much wisdom within this course. But you scroll down to where it talks about the purple circle. It might be well for you to reflect upon the great world geniuses. Okay. And it talks about how they actually walk into the forest. And I want to go on down to where I have the green highlighted on 304, because again, it brings up the Moonlight Sonata is a reflection of the mood of nature as such as that. And then the next paragraph, it says this: we will add in passing that he who is enabled to so decentrate that he can translate nature's moods does so only because he has been enabled to talk to God in God's language of light waves and light rhythms. So I want to ask the panel to please comment on that, because as we get ready to go into Unit 5 and then on Unit 6, John, that's when we start diving more into the science. I really would like us to talk a moment about the importance of light waves and light rhythms, even as it relates to the wave illustration behind me. Talk a little bit about that as we prepare everybody to get ready for the deeper lessons coming soon.
Yeah, I regret that the Russells didn't use Mozart's work to make the example more clear. That darn Beethoven.
Light rhythms there, light waves and light rhythms, John.
Yes, all the great immortals. And what makes something immortal? What makes something is immortal is that it has God in it. And that's why it lasts forever. So it's been inspired by God. And go ahead.
But dive into the word light waves, please. Let's start.
Okay, light waves. So as you look over Kimberly's right shoulder, okay, you're seeing a sequence of light waves. And that wave that you see, that cycle can be 1 trillion times a second, just like you drew on your little pad there, Kimberly. Mm-hmm. Or it could be one time. It could be one cycle could last 1 billion years. But the sequence never changes. It is throughout the universe, and that's why these lessons are so crucial. Universal law. Even God has to operate within the laws that this universe is created upon. There's no exceptions.
Who else wants to mention something about light waves and light rhythms?
You know, the way I interpreted it, God's light waves and light rhythms are still invisible. In other words, it's inspiration that has come to these musicians, all the great geniuses throughout time, is really what has given us world culture. In her book, Why You Cannot Die, she makes the point that Beethoven is the genius remembered, not the billionaire of his day that might have, provided Beethoven money. Nobody remembers him. Everybody remembers Beethoven because he was able to interpret the rhythms and the waves from out of the silences.
Okay, powerfully said. As we're inching here towards the end, I know Karen is working with James to have everything ready for us to show the visual journey there towards the end. But I found this question at the bottom of 304. I thought this would be inspiring to many of you that are parents, grandparents, or simply aunts and uncles. But it says this. It says, I have a son. If we'll scroll down, it says, I have a son who desires is to paint pictures. He would willingly give up every pleasure that boys usually indulge in order to paint. We do not mind his painting, but we are informed that good artists cannot make a living since modern art degraded good art. As a mother of an artist, I understand this. Also, he neglects his schooling and other duties of life. He listens to classic music for hours on our gramophone. Don't you love that word? That's not one you have seen very lately, but will not listen to television. The general impression of his friends is that he is an impractical dreamer who will never amount to anything. And my men friends seem to be sorry for my wife and me for having so dull a son. What do you think about it, and what should we do about it? Ken, if you would read the answer to this, because I think it really wraps up what this lesson is about.
Yes, your boy is one of the small percent of the human race who has unfolded his spiritual nature beyond the other larger majority of physically sensed humans. The physical majority do not understand the spiritually advanced ones. It is an experience which they have never had for themselves. Therefore, they either deny it in others or do not recognize it. The question as to whether your boy can make money out of art is not an issue. He should cultivate it for what it will do to him, whether he becomes a painter or not. Such an expression in the arts denotes the creative mind rather than the imitative one. That is what he is trying to develop. You should assist him in doing so, even if he has to earn his living some other way and use art as an avocation, which means a hobby.
Whoops, we just lost him. At any rate, you might console yourself by the assurance that your boy is superior to those who criticize him, and scroll down, and you are indeed fortunate for having a gifted one. So here's what's interesting about that. And I wanted to say this to everybody. So I have a daughter who is both an engineer and an artist, and a rather interesting combination. And so she has been working in the art scene for quite some time. There you are. We lost you. I'm glad to see you back. But she has been sharing with me that there is a movement in her particular city for people to help artists so that we can overcome this notion of a starving artist. That there is a growing level of people, a growing number of people that are beginning to realize that bringing beauty to the world is one of those very important things that are going to elevate our consciousness. And so it was inspiring for her to see these people that are really starting to step up and say, we must bring more art to the world. We must bring more beauty to the world. And so to the panel, who I know finds that Walter and Leo were and such support of making sure that we bring that kind of beauty and art to the world, I was curious about how you might be inspired by that.
Actually, I think that since platforms like GoFundMe and Kickstarter, sometimes there are artists there or creative people that are supported by thousands of people that they don't even know. So I think that's a hopeful sign when you see a campaign that's been very successful for that sort of endeavor.
Ken, we lost you, but we wanted to know if you wanted to comment there about this, what the life of this boy was when they were saying that boy, in fact, is superior to those who criticize him.
Yeah, we all are, and art is one. If you look at culture, Margaret said it. All the culture that we have today, which you would call culture, the things you enjoy, the art, the music, and the great geniuses and the illuminates illuminists that have been, are immortalized by their works. So and yet they don't have, Beethoven didn't have any more music in him than John Boswell. Well, I won't go that far. Jim Porter, or anything like that.
All right, we lost him again there. So it just comes sometimes down to the internet. So James, if you would, while we're wrapping up here, if you'll let me know if you are ready for our visual journey. So I have a confession to make to John, since he was really the first one who ever got me interested in art. So I did not walk into this museum until I was 52, and I had never really spent a whole lot of time with art. I'd known people who were artists. I would occasionally, but I never had a reverence for art, is what I'm bringing to the group. And John really changed my perspective with the Russell work. Are you all there?
Yes,
we are here.
Well, you all got so still. I was afraid I was the one who was frozen. But John, you helped me have a new reference for the power of art. And I had never really, I guess, combined art and divinity and that expression of the creator. And so I'm just curious, because that inspiration that you gave me the very first day that I walked in, you linked creativity and art and divinity for me. And I was wondering if you could do that for our audience tonight.
The museum that's in Waynesboro, it is the embodiment of this message. And if anyone has the means to travel, to go to that museum and see great art, and I mean great art. I'll never forget when I was president, we went up to DC, to the National Museum of Art. And in that building, it was so inspiring because some of the greats that the world knows, the Monets and so on. And when I got back to the museum the next morning, I was standing there with Jeremy, and we walked in the front doors, and I told him to stop and look. And I said, Jeremy, it took hundreds of great artisans to fill that National Gallery of Art. But Walter Russell, and we have 4% of his work here, fills a 20,000 square foot museum. So if you want to see great art, and if you want to see what it means to work knowingly with God, that museum is where you'll take that in. So I appreciate you saying that, Kimberly. And that's what is art. That's what art is supposed to do, is to inspire others. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because John, you really opened my eyes to that. And so as we're beginning to wrap up here tonight, I know James and Karen are busy getting ready at that visual journey. A few tiny minor tech glitches, but we're going to try it anyway. I want to bring up what Ida said here. Ida says, act right to live good. I like it, Ken, because I think that is the key for the wave of life. Very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. And Karen, you said, I love the letter to us at the end of this lesson. So Karen, let's go ahead and do that before we continue, because there is a letter from Walter and Leo starting on page 307. And if we'll show that right quick as we're getting that visual journey ready. And they actually write this whole idea of writing to the friends and to the students. And I want to skip down to where I wrote the word true. And it says, intelligence is not increased at the same rate as complexity of the problems to be solved. Thus, we are on a downward path. And so they were talking about their responsibility. And if we'll scroll down there, it says, he that says the pursuit of the kind of happiness, right there, he that says that the pursuit of the kind of happiness which material values are bringing us has not brought us happiness, but it has shown itself incapable of preventing our deterioration. That is why we are trying to show the world what is the matter with it, so that we can remedy any trouble. Our analysis of the meaning of higher knowledge is given to you for that very purpose. That is also why we are telling you that man must know his universe in order to understand its ways. And it says this, just as a motorist must know the rules of the road in order to journey through a city. I've been in the car with some of these folks. I know sometimes that ends up being a challenge. I'm just kidding. To know our universe, we must become scientists, whether we will or not, for we cannot know nature's ways without becoming scientists. And I thought that was really powerful. And if we'll scroll down to where I have it highlighted there, I'm going to ask Jim, if you would just read that sentence that's highlighted in yellow, please. The new knowledge.
The new knowledge given herein is the meaning of higher knowledge, and a program for giving it to the world will soon become the basis for the establishment of a new way of life in which love and law will be its basis.
I thought that was really, really important. This is why a new way of life in which love will be its basis. And so thank you so much for bringing that up, Karen, about what it is that we're saying. So we say to you, therefore, know your universe and its creator, for a new world of man must issue from it within the next few years, and apparently the next few decades, as we are still working on that with all of our love and our full realization of our responsibility in making it possible for our students to transform themselves through this new knowledge. We are, and it says, devotedly yours, Leo and Walter Russell. A last comment on this, Miss Margaret, before we show the visual journey.
Yeah, coming back to the boy that wanted to express art, and also if you're inspired to do art, I think anybody that creates, it gets a tremendous sense of satisfaction just in the actual creating. Whether it's good or whether it's average, it doesn't really matter, because it's the very act of creating gives you a wonderful sense of accomplishment. And this is why Leo always encouraged parents to teach their children to do things and keep them busy, keeping them creating, so that they would know that life is about creating something and giving out of themselves.
All right. Well, thank you, Margaret. And speaking of creation, we're about to experience a creation. Now, Karen gives us the caveat that she has just finished this in the nick of time. We still need to proof it. We still need to update it. So to the panel, I ask you to make any notes about what we'll need to update. But she did pull together some updated items for Unit 4. So this is a new visual journey. As I mentioned, we will not have our live broadcast as usual on the last Sunday of the month. This month, we're taking our break for that one because we do have the homecoming event here at the University of Science and Philosophy, and also gives you all a chance to catch up. And we will have a playlist available for all of you there on YouTube where you can see all of the visual journeys and everything will be updated. So fingers crossed. Let's see Karen's creation as we're wrapping up Unit 4. Let's roll, James. Right. A gracious thank you to Karen. So Karen already sees, and the perfectionist that she is, she already sees that there are some things that she wants to change for next time, but we continue to make this an iterative process for us all. And so in just the spirit of creation, it takes a great deal of effort and energy and thought into this. And Margaret, you're watching us as we, even as an awakened show, grow and learn. What do you want to just say about taking these items and putting it into visuals, even if it is an evolving process?
Actually, it's a nice summary. I think maybe it could be abbreviated a little bit, but I do like the summary, and the visuals are very powerful.
I think so too. I
Mhm.
think so too. So before we, as participants, we'd like to ask you to please offer any questions. We have a few members of our panel here left as we're wrapping things up. Ask us if you have any questions. We want to just say a gracious thank you to you all. We want to encourage you again to get a copy of the home study course. It is still on sale, $50 off for the month of September. You can see the link below. I do want to bring up that we do have an event next weekend, and that is, if we'll bring that up on the screen here, it will be available by Zoom for anybody who wants to join us. There is going to be a homecoming event here at the Waynesboro Museum, and it's based on the secret of universality, but it is also available by Zoom. You'll see there's a whole panel of speakers. Robert Edwards Grant, Shervin will be talking about some of the nutrition and health side. Marco, who's one of our graduates of the Russell Experience, along with Ashley, will be talking about love embodied. And then we have long-term students there of the Bullingtons. Now, I do want to look at October. We have coming up here, as I can ask my panel to please look at the comments and see if we have any upcoming questions, if you'll help me out with that. So for the October, we're going to dive into lessons 17 through 20, a potent prelude for the thoughtful, the birth of character, the ethical basis of character and its gradual death, and again, questions and answers there at the end. So to my panel, are there any questions there in the chat box that we need to address?
Nope, nothing new.
Okay. All right. So we'll see if you have. We're not going to keep everybody on. We want to just say a gracious thank you. So please know that I was really excited to be here at the University of Science and Philosophy, broadcasting from the new studio. You can begin to see what's happening here. Have a lot more that's going to come. Here you'll see our banner here, and we're excited about what's going to happen as we move forward. And so we have a couple of thank yous here. So Susan says thank you to everyone. If we'll pull that up on the screen there, thank you to everyone. I saw it skip up there. Thank you to everyone on the panel tonight. Rebecca also had a comment here. I want to say a gracious thank you all to joining as we inched almost to 100 people, 100 views here tonight. We'll take a look at Rebecca. Rebecca says this: Hope to join us on Zoom next weekend. So glad to hear about that. And then we also have Rita who says, thanks for another great class. And so we encourage you all. I'll ask the panel for any final words in just a moment. As you walk through this world, look for beauty in the world and take everything that has been said here and simply tune in to what your universal heartbeat is and the journey that you're with. There's no accident that you're here with us at this time. So final thoughts from the panel. Any burning last thoughts you want to share as we get ready to say until next time?
I do have one. I interpreted Deborah's earlier remark about giving our power away to a higher power. I believe she was referencing maybe churches, because a lot of people will give away their power to the priest, right? Or to the organization where the power is always here. And so that's how I interpreted her. I thought it was a very clever insight.
Yes, I thought so too. Jim?
I'd like to say one thing on the science aspect, where we just read there in that letter that you need to know science. Is that, remember, we're talking about the natural law of science that's taught in this home study course, and you just learned about a scientific principle with the seesaw. That's a scientific principle. So the science we're talking about is not academic science. It's science that you will understand, you can comprehend, and you can implement in your life and see the world in a way you never thought possible as a scientist.
Final thought, Jim.
I would just say to everybody, enjoy your life over the next couple of weeks and give the world the gift of yourself. You have so much to give.
I couldn't say it any better. So do remember, we are taking our first break next Sunday, September 29th. So we encourage you to go back and look at some of the previous videos. We will have an update, a playlist of all the visual journeys from Unit 1 all the way through Unit 4 with the updates from this week. And you'll begin to find this language become much more familiar and much more comfortable with you. We will reconvene back together on October 6th. So we want to say a gracious thank you to you all. Share, like Jim said, what you bring to this world. Thank you, everyone. Until next time.